Okie dokie. We're going to continue our study of chapter 4, titled We Agnostics. If you don't have the book, we have a couple up here that one you can certainly borrow them. This chapter is tremendously important in the program and is a pivotal point in the big book, because this is the chapter which brings us from a place of doubt, perhaps, and even denial in terms of a higher power. It is the chapter which contains within it the second step, and in a couple of pages we're going to find out what that is. It's also a chapter which lays out some basic rules that if you're a sponsor, you have to understand these rules. Let's go back a little bit and pick up from the beginning of the chapter just briefly so that we understand where we are here. This is a chapter which defines for us what our problem is. It calls it the dilemma, lack of power. That was our dilemma. And then we had to find a power by which we could live, which of course means as opposed to die, and it has to be a power greater than ourselves. Where were we to find this power? And then it tells us that that's exactly what this book's all about. In other words, it defines for us the basic mission of the big book, which is to enable you and me and all other alcoholics the opportunity to find a power greater than ourselves which will solve our problem. And then very strangely, in a couple more sentences, it goes on to say that this means we're going to talk about God. And that this may raise some hackles and, ruffle a few feathers, but nevertheless, that's what we're going to do. And of course, if you even bother to read the 12 steps, you see God is liberally scattered through all the steps. Right there in the second step, right up front. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now that power greater than ourselves is capitalized. Quite obviously, we're talking about a deity there, aren't we? Now, chapter 4 also lays out certain basic rules that we have to follow in terms of sponsorship. For example, it really takes us back to what Evie did with Bill. And we remember in Bill's story what happened, because Bill was agnostic and having a lot of trouble with the idea of a God personal to him. And he really was rejecting that idea. It didn't make sense to him that this all-powerful being would have any reason or willingness to have anything to do with individual human beings. Until Evie came along and said, well, Bill, you choose your own conception of God. And it was right there that since he wasn't being forced to accept some concept of God, which was the protocol of the recovery group, the Oxford people that they were dealing with in those days, but rather he was able to choose his own conception of a higher power of God. It cleared away all of the icy intellectual mountain in which he had shivered all these years. And then Evie said, well, not only can you choose your own conception of God, but it's only necessary that you be willing to believe that there just might be a God or just might be a power out there greater than yourself. And that's all that's required to get started. Well, both of those ideas are incorporated strongly in the first 3 or 4 pages of this chapter. That the only requirement for getting started is a willingness to believe, and that we can choose our own conception of God. Now, as a sponsor, you got to know that stuff, because this is the way that we are able to approach somebody who is probably scared to death of acknowledging the existence of God, which perhaps they've learned in the past is a punishing God, knowing that they've committed all kinds of stuff that there's maybe called sin in their religious upbringing. In any event, that they are really candidates for punishment, and they don't want to have to acknowledge God. They don't want to have to even think about the possibility that this higher power exists. And so, when we're working with people like that, we need to give them just what Eddie gave Bill. Look, so that you can choose your own conception of God. You don't have to accept mine or AA's or anybody else's. We don't have a God of AA. We have each of us individually determine what our conception of God should be. And furthermore, you only need to be willing to believe that God exists. Now then, here's where we come in, because this business of willingness, it's a fine statement to say, well, all you got to do is be willing. But then, if you run up against this, well, how do I get willing? Aha, see, that's the real problem. And all the way through the big book, from now on, you're going to see this business of willingness coming up and up and up and up and up and up and again, because it's key to everything. For example, in the 6th step, where there's some defects we're not ready to be freed of, the only solution the big book gives us is to pray for willingness. And same in the 8th step, if there are bends we're not willing to make, we pray for the willingness until it comes. And so this question of willingness is something which begins right here in the 1st and 2nd step. So you ask, well, what do I do about it? Here's somebody who is professing an agnosticism, or perhaps even a flat disbelief. How do I get them to go from a place of unwillingness to a place of willingness? In other words, how do I get them to apply a solution here? Well, we can go back to what Bill found. He writes about this in a couple of places in the literature. What he says is, I learned I had to pray just as if there were a God. And then, when the miracles started coming, and I could no longer deny that they came from the power greater than myself, that's when faith came. And he also writes about his great epiphany, his great spiritual experience. That what happened there was that he finally turned to God and said, God, if you're there, show yourself to me. And that's when he had this fantastic experience which stayed with him for the rest of his life. So what do we do? Well, we're going to say, okay, here's what you do. You're going to pray for the willingness, and you may pray to whom it may concern. Or God, if you're there, or in any way you wish. Because we know that the moment the responsee begins to pray for willingness, guess what? The willingness is going to come. Now, hopefully they won't learn that lesson too early, because you see what happens then is that everywhere along the line, if they're told to pray for willingness, they know they're going to have to be prepared to be willing, because it's going to happen. And so that's the way we get that started. It's important then as sponsors that we understand the dynamics of this. How are we going to go from this place over here, which is represented by the first step, the flat admission of the alcoholism and the acceptance of the fact that you never safely drink again, the plug is in the jug. From there to an acknowledgement of the existence of God. Because that's what the second step requires, isn't it? That there's got to be acknowledgement of the existence of a higher power. And the granting to that higher power of the ability to restore us to sanity. Not to say that it or he will restore us to sanity, but only that it or he can. In other words, has the power to do so. And so there's a real leap here from perhaps a place of total disbelief or denial or doubt at least, to a place in the second step of saying, yes indeed, God does exist, and God is everything, and I believe that He has the power to restore me to sanity. So that's what this chapter is about, you know. Its purpose is to get us to a point where that second step becomes available to us, where we can accept as a belief, a part of our belief system, that there is a God who is strong enough to restore us to sanity. There's more to this chapter, though, and that you would think would be plenty. But this chapter is very dense, and it's very compact, and it's very, very, very important. Because, as with everything else in the steps in the Big Book, one step leads to another. Everything ties in with everything else. So that, as in the third chapter, remember, more about alcoholism, we actually found there was a major tie-in with the second step with respect to this question of insanity, and there it was all laid out for us in chapter 3. Now, chapter 4 is going to help us segue into the third step. In other words, it's going to begin to connect the dots here and to provide an entree into the idea of surrender to this higher power. And so, in the latter part of this chapter, as we shall see, it begins to prepare that way. So let's go on page 51 now. This chapter contains a lot of material which examines the basis of the bridge of reason, the rule of reason, the rule of science, the dependence that we have on science and scientific thinking, and the abhorrence of anything which is esoteric or metaphysical. Well, let's see what it says here on page 51. The first full paragraph, about a third of the way down. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Boy, is that ever true. I was born in 1928, and I can tell you that we had a four-party line. We did have a telephone, although we didn't have one at the ranch where I was born. There was no phone there. They hadn't stretched the phone line that far. There was a horse-drawn sleigh that went across the frozen lake in the wintertime. And the Indians were out in front chucking holes in the ice and taking a bath every day. And there was a pinned-up stag in the front, on the front lawn, and there was an old grizzly bear out in the back who came in there once in a while to eat huckleberries. And when I first went to work as a lawyer, we had a thermofax. I don't know if anybody knows the thermofax. It's a piece of crap, you know, it's this heat-sensitive paper, and you run your original through on one side, and it would burn the letters into this paper, which would immediately begin to curl, and it probably would be, within a few months, it would be totally faded out. It was almost useless. We were making 13 copies of pleadings, for example, and secretary didn't think anything about it, and they just had a big old standard typewriter. They had a plug-in switchboard, and you had to be real careful not to make mistakes, because then you had to erase 13 copies. The dictaphone was a belt. And I hated those things. I still hate them. I won't use them. So, you know, this is, and almost everybody's car had a stick shift, and if you had a car, we had an ice chest instead of a refrigerator when I was growing up. And the ice rink actually came 3 times a week. And it kept stuff pretty cold. It wasn't all that bad. My dad was making $100 a month, and we family of 5 lived on. We were lucky. Huge changes. I can remember when the first talk was of saying somebody to moon or to Mars. There was Buck Rogers. If you can believe this, my mother would give me 25 cents on Saturday. 5 cents for the bus to get to the movies, 5 cents on the bus to get back. 10 cents for the movie and 5 cents for a treat. That 25 cents was important. So I've seen this, and so what Bill's talking about here, when I really stop and think about it, it boggles my mind. It's sad. Matter of fact, I still think the computer is a dangerous instrument. I don't want to push any buttons that might blow up. And we got them all over our office, and we have people doing it every day. I don't have one on my desk. I don't trust it with damn thing. In any event, almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today, yet in ancient times material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. And I suppose, really, we ought to include religion there. We got stuff going on now that just simply boggles the mind. The other day, for example, somebody gave me a book. It could well have been called Quantum Physics for Dummies. That's a pretty complicated subject, but I started reading this, and I said, wow, my God, this stuff is changing everything. Now, that's an interesting point, because you see that the things in the physical world, the scientific world, were things that we've come to depend upon as being absolute. And what quantum theories are showing is that probably a whole bunch of these absolutes are just not right at all. So what do we have to depend on? Well, the whole idea was that we can depend on this stuff much like flipping a light switch. Well, tell that to the people in New York the other day. Flip the switch and no electricity. So where can our dependence be where it will always be honored? And we find that out as we go through our steps. When we depend on God, we are able to know absolutely that we can depend on God. And that's the whole point here. You see what this is doing? It is setting the stage for those who are having difficulty making the switch over to the unseen, the unknown, the unknowable, as opposed to touch, feel, sense, the things that can be measured, the things that what in fact mankind has done is to take a theory and then make the facts fit the theory. We take round pegs and pound them into square holes. And our most effective way of doing this is get a better hammer, bigger hammer. And everybody says, oh, well, okay, that fits. In ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research and invention was almost unknown. Bill was writing this in 1939. And since most of you weren't born yet, it would be difficult for you to think of that as being modern. But, in 1939 it was. In fact, they were you start buying radios and they were rounded in the corners instead of square. There was a Dodge, there was a DeSoto airplane car that had all rounded nose and tail and everything. It was a weird looking thing. We called it the Airstream. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, all sorts of fixed ideas. I'd like to add religion there. Some of the worst impediments to man's progress have been the religious folks who are trying to protect their turf. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. Somebody asked me the other day, what is a heresy? I said, well, it's anything that is opposite to what the other guy believes. And if it's an institutional belief, it's become set in stone. And now everybody's supposed to believe it. And when you're supposed to believe it, then we want to make sure you believe it. To make sure you believe it, then we offer up a whole smorgasbord of punishments for those who don't believe or have the temerity to contradict. And it gets bad enough, put you on the rack, or we burn you to death. And all in the name of protecting the purity of the established thought and belief system. But you can see how that would keep any real progress from happening. My gosh, why would you want to suggest something that was different from what was being taught on the pain of getting burned because you did it? We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved the privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and the airplane travel was in full swing. It was about the time this book was being written was when Douglas Company built a two-engine airplane they called the DC-2, and then that later became the DC-3. I don't know how many thousands of those things they built, and a whole bunch of them are still flying. If you want to go from Bogota, Colombia, to Leticia down on the headwaters of the Amazon, the only way to get there, except to trek through the jungle, is to get on a DC-3 and fly down there. And these old things are just keep on keeping on. You know, they flew them over the hump. And you probably remember that this was a way to get into China, because we were supplying during the Second World War. We were supplying the Chinese army with arms and ammunition and stuff. And the only way to get it there from Burma was to fly across the mountains, so to call flying over the hump. And these old DC-3s were never built to do that. But they were pilots who were going to do it. They put themselves on oxygen. They hoped those engines would keep running, because if they didn't, there was no place to land. And they were always overloaded. And those airplanes are still flying. Prior to that, there was the old Ford Triangle. Ford actually, did you know Ford was in the airplane building business? They built a lightweight passenger plane with 3 engines called the Triangle. And there's still a few of those around. People have restored them and they fly them at air shows and stuff. If you were into air travel in those days, believe me, you hope those pilots would make every effort to avoid those storm cells, because if they didn't, you were going to get bounced. I don't mean a little bit, I mean bounced all over him. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. So any long sermon or Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it, maybe not so long either. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new? by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work, or something new which does. And you see where this is leading up to now. It's like you're going to get rid of all this old thinking, and you're going to have to start with a whole new attitude and outlook about life, which is what the promise says we're going to receive. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. If we were having trouble with personal relationships, we couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. Was not the basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. You see what's happening here, this is the same thing that we use as sponsors. We turn the rule of reason around. We say, now look, you want to believe in science and mathematics and reasonable stuff? Let's get reasonable about this. Let's look at this dispassionately. Where are you today? What's your present reality today? How great is your life? How well have you been able to manage your life? Is any of this stuff working for you? Are you not about as desperate as you could possibly get? Have you not decided somewhere along the line that you're willing to go any lengths to get what we have? Well, if that's true, then what you're going to need to do here, friend, is shift gears. You're going to need to take a fresh look at some new ideas. And that's a pretty powerful argument, especially coming from someone like yourself who's already done it. You demonstrated in your life that this stuff really works. And here's the rationale. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Highly practical. Just take a look at page 62 just for a second, because I want to show you that everything in this book is tied together with everything else. And we're going to come back to this when we get to the third step. Down at the bottom of the page, the last full paragraph on page 62. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. But you see, it's a very, very practical point of view. And then we get the third step right here, which is a decision, isn't it? And we can say, therefore, next we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God is going to be our director. He is the principal, and we are his agents. He is the Father, and we are his children. So let's take a clue from that, because think in terms of what you're going to be teaching your sponsees and what it means to them, and how we go about showing them what's going on here. For example, the fourth step. What is the fourth step? Is that a gigantic indictment of them and all their peccadillos, all their troubles, all their horrible behavior? No. The fourth step is not meant to do that at all. It's find out what the hell's wrong with them. And especially to find out what did not work. Well, let's stop right there, because now we get down to the nexus of the problem. If you and I are going to be effective sponsors, we're going to teach people to recognize what didn't work, and then we're going to teach them what will work. So they stop doing what didn't work, and they start doing what will work. And as soon as they do that, their whole life changes. Now they become a believer. Now you've got to hold it down. They're going to go off like a rocket. They're out looking for fresh meat to convince that all this is true. However, you see how simple it is how simple it is, because we're not talking here about blame. We're not talking here about sin. There's no sin in AA. Forget the 12-12. That's a pile of crap. There's no sin here. We're talking about things that didn't work. And why didn't they work? Because our minds have been twisted by overwhelming fear. Our natural God-given instincts stopped working for us and began to work against us. Now, we can't do anything about that because instinctual by nature is something beyond our control, isn't it? When we act by instinct, we don't think about it, it just happens. So we can't get rid of this instinctual twisting and warping by ourselves. That's why we need God's help with it. To bring our natural God-given instincts back into life, back into reality, and back into sanity, we need God's help. We can't do it ourselves. And that's why when we do our 4-step and our 5th-step, we concentrate on what did not work. Along the line, we're going to make amends. And I'll tell you why. Again, it's something that didn't work. If I harmed you, but I didn't set matters straight, I infected myself with guilt, remorse, and shame. And guilt blocks me from God. So that doesn't work very well either, does it? What we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that guilt by making amends. See, everything is very, very practical. And the big book makes it clear on page 85 that all of this is automatic. Right at the top of the page, automatic. If we can remember that, we can remember that what's really happening here is that we're following directions, which if we do follow them, will automatically result in the coming of a spiritual awakening and all the other things that go along with that. If we know that, we understand that, then we're well along the road to understanding what the steps are doing. An engineer dies and reports to the pearly gates. St. Peter checks his dossier and says, you're an engineer. You're in the wrong place. So the engineer reports to the gates of hell and is let in. Pretty soon the engineer gets dissatisfied with the level of discomfort in hell and starts designing and building improvements. After a while, they've got air conditioning and flush toilets and escalators. And the engineer is a pretty popular guy. One day God calls Satan up on the telephone and says with a sneer, "So how's it going down there in hell?" Satan replies, "Hey, things are going great. We got air conditioning and flush toilets and escalators. And you don't tell me what the engineer is going to come up with next." God replies, "What? You got an engineer. That's a mistake. He should never have gotten down there. Send him up here." They said, "No way. I like having an engineer on the staff and I'm keeping him." God says, "Send him back up here or I'll sue." Satan laughs uproariously and answers, "Yeah, right. And just where are you going to get a lawyer?" Okie dokie, we're going now on page 52 again. The last partial paragraph, bottom of the page. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who insisted the rights would never fly. But logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It's not by chance we were given the power to reason to examine the evidence of our senses and to draw conclusions. That's one of the man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. You see what Bill's trying to do here is to meld this rule of reason in with the coming to understand that there is nothing unreasonable about having a higher power. Hence we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe. See why it's more sane and logical to believe than not to believe. That's a subtle approach to the whole problem, isn't it? Why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, well, we don't know. Now then, here's an interesting little thing about the big book. Is that we find it all the way through the book. Every once in a while, it just jumps right up and hits you in the face. There's a place in the beginning of the 9th step, discussion of the 9th step, where it comes out and says, well, you know, at the moment you're trying to put your life in order. But this is not an end in itself. Your real purpose here is to fit yourself to be of maximum service to God and the people's value. Boom! That's what you're really here for. Then it goes on and talks about the 9th step. Well, look at this. This is the 2nd step. Right here in the middle of all this stuff. And then, not only is this the 2nd step, but it hits us right between the eyes with another concept we haven't even thought about, but which is going to be expanded upon when we get to the 3rd step. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. What is this business, self-imposed crisis? I just got out of 6 months in the treatment center and they spent 6 months convincing me that it was everybody else's fault but mine. The poor guy, no wonder you drank so much. Look at all these triggers you have. Look at all those bad people in your life. Look at how much you were abused. Look at how unlucky you've been. Look at how deprived you have been. You were deprived of love. You were deprived of affection. You had no role models. No wonder you never grew up. And we loved it. Man, did we love it. We didn't have to take responsibility. We loved it. And then on top of that, we got a disease. So I have a disease, and I'm not responsible for how I respond to that disease because it's everybody else's fault. Including, of course, the fact that I was born poor, or my family was dysfunctional. Who the hell's family is it? Did you ever find a family that was? Not in light of the definition that the sites would like to apply. How many times do you find June and Ward Cleaver walking around in reality? I doubt it would ever happen, unless they were completely psycho themselves. So now, we're faced with a crushed by a self-imposed crisis. Brings us right back to home. No excuses here, you see. There are no weasel words. Doesn't say, oh golly, gee whiz, it might sort of somehow or another kind of be like your fault. I don't want to make you unhappy now. I don't want to disturb your little psyche, but you might want to consider the possibility you have some responsibility here, my dear. Because everything is designed here to make you comfortable. Don't want you uncomfortable. That's why when you tell me what you've done, I'm going to tell you the things I've done that are 10 times worse. I don't want you to feel bad. That's why I'm going to have you write down all the good things about yourself. I don't want you to feel that. I don't want you to have to face up to your reality. I want you to continue to be able to skate around it in ice and sugarcoat it so that you will be comfortable and you won't be upset. And then when you go to your meetings, you can say, how kind I am. So kind. I just never made you actually look at yourself, did I? My God, don't we understand that it's not the good stuff that's killing us? It's the bad stuff. That's what we have to get rid of. So now, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade, which is a perfect definition, is it not, of a bottom. I reached a place where I can no longer postpone or evade the consequences of my actions. Now, therefore, at this point, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He's nothing. Come on, guy, here it is. Here's what you're gonna have to come to this. God either is or He's nothing. God's either everything or He's nothing. Can't have it in between. Although we would love to have it that way. New Age AA would love to take that God who must be everything or nothing and make Him sometimes something and sometimes not so much. And it doesn't really matter anyway. Because we don't want to disturb anybody with absolutes. Everything is comparative. Everything's comparative, and we'll show you that when we get you to your 4th step. Because you're not going to look at what they did to you and hold it under a microscope, hold it up to the raw glare of the Klieg lights. No. After you've written down what they did to you, then you're going to write down what you did to them. The whole idea being that if we do that, these two things will zero out. I'm supposed to become freed from my resentments by coming finally to the conclusion that I shouldn't have them. And it's so damn childish, I can't give it credence, and yet it's all over the place now. Just the other day, somebody was telling me about she was doing her 4th step, and she just had reached the turnaround. I said, the turnaround? What the hell are you talking about? Oh, well, this is where I have to write about myself now, how bad I am. Okay, that's the second part. No, it's all part of that first part. I got, and so then she showed me her 5-column list. Contribution by Hazelton. A wonderful place, Hazelton, which has published a little booklet which shows you how to smoke crack. That's a wonderful, wonderful institution. Good God. And they took their hands to trying to simplify something which God handed to us by way of inspiration. Shame on that. We could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else He's nothing. Yes or no, black or white, there is no in between. Well, of course, how could there be? Be a little logical about it, which makes perfectly good sense, doesn't it? The next question, God either is or He's not. So now you've got your Swansea sitting there, and you've asked these two questions. God either is or isn't. What's your answer? Well, God is. God's either everything or He's nothing. What's your answer? Well, God is everything. Well, then there's one logical follow-on question, isn't there? If God is, and God is everything, can you have any doubt whatsoever that he can restore you to sanity? There's only one answer to that. Of course I have no such doubt. In other words, I have come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. That's the second step. Yeah, that works. And it's also bloody simple. You got these questions to ask, and it makes it very easy for you. You think your sponsor is ready, sit them down and ask them a question. What was our choice to be? Well, now Bill is posing this as a choice question. With the idea, of course, that he's going on with some more discussion here of the alternatives. But as a matter of fact, when he wrote this little 5-line paragraph, what he did was he gave us a test. Here's the test. You see how that works, guys? As a sponsor, here's your test for the second step. Now then, also commencing here, this chapter begins to segue into the third step, and let's see how that happens. We've been looking at this whole business of agnosticism or atheism or doubt, this whole business of wanting to be scientifically and reasonably reassured that all these things are not only possible but true. Well, let's see how that comes out. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Now, some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. Visualize, if you will, the bridge of reason, and over here is the new land of faith. We're trying to cross the bridge of reason to reach faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land have brought luster to tired eyes, fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands have stretched out in welcome. Visualize the new land, the bridge of faith, people in the new land who have reached the land of faith. Their arms are out in welcome. Saying, come on, here we are. Come on, we want you with us. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we've been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. This is the place at the end of the bridge of reason which does not reach to the new land of faith, where we get our first taste of the leap of faith. This is where the leap of faith comes in. We're going to jump from the bridge of reason to the outstretched and waiting arms of the new land of faith. And we'll make it, and we'll be there, and we will be welcomed, and we will be helped. And then after we've done that, we say, wow, that worked. And right then our faith begins to grow. We might write that off as coincidence or a one-time thing, but over and over again as we work our steps, we're going to be called upon to make one leap of faith after another. And every time we do that, we're going to experience God working in our lives. We're going to come to know and to experience that we can trust Him. And that therefore our faith will grow as a result of that experience. This paragraph is a very powerful one. And you should understand it, and you should point it out to your sponsees. See that they understand. Going down to the bottom of page 53, that was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? Or did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? Well, is that but a sort of faith? Yes, we've been faithful, abjectly faithful to God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. That's a pretty interesting way that Bill put it, isn't it? Because he twists this belief around this faith. We've had faith in the God of reason. We've had faith in science, in scientific theory, and so-called scientific realities, mathematical realities, geological realities. To have faith, with blind faith, we just believe it. We found too that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that flesh had used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiments, things, money, and ourselves? And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much do these feelings, these loves, these worships, have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives are constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we've been living by faith and little else. Isn't that an interesting source? Taking faith, which is normally used in the sense of a deity or higher power, and turn it around to faith in those things which appeal to reason. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Well, of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that we can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. Yet there it was. Could we still say the only thing was nothing but that the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we could. Electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that. Matter of fact, they're proving how intelligent they are. Far more than we ever had any reason to believe. At least so the chemists said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of it uses, entirely dependable, though it emanates from our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? If we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from the world, people who rose above their problems, they said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We'd seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Now we come to a part of the 4th chapter which is, again, extraordinarily important. Quite revolutionary in many regards. Because it postulates a review of God's relationship to man, which may not square with many religious beliefs. And yet, it's pretty logical. And I'm not quite sure how all of this got left in the Big Book by the editorial committee, because some of them were pretty rabid. Apparently they decided to give Bill a break here. It's a good thing, because the more we think about this, the more we live, the more we come to realize that all this stuff was probably true. Let's see what it says now. Actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it's there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives ecclesiastical literature. He's alluding to the written record and some oral record of miracles, the demonstration of the power of God in human lives, beyond simply the fact that we live, beyond simply the fact that we keep breathing, or that there are everyday occurrences which may or may not be within God's realm. But Bill's talking about here the faith and power within ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. And of course, I don't think he's trying to say that everybody who walks in the door has faith in the power of God. That's certainly not true. So what this is really saying is that this is inherent in all of us, although not apparent in many of us. But that deep down inside of us it is there. And so what he's really saying is, if you believe this, then you better be looking for the God within. Because that's where you're going to find him. Let's see what this next paragraph says. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. God is being postulated here as spirit, which is part of us. In fact, I guess what you could say is, the Bill is saying we are spirit, God is spirit, God is of us and we are of him. Well, I happen to believe that that's true. But these are some pretty radical statements if you stop and think about them, because it just goes right around so much of religious things in terms of what is necessary for us to even be heard by God. Some religious beliefs require us to go through intermediaries in order to get there. And of course, one of the major religions insisted that we only go to God through his Son. And so Bill is saying, God's there. He's deep down inside of ourselves, and that's where we're going to find him. This is consistent with what we find later. Go to page 85, please. At the bottom of the page, the last full paragraph. Much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his Spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious of the God within. We've begun to develop this vital sixth sense. That means, of course, that we have now the ability to be inspired or intuitively directed by God. We must go further, and that means more action. Take a look at page 75 now. This is in the fifth step. Page 75, the center paragraph. Go halfway down that center paragraph, right square in the middle of the page. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. We feel we're on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. Did you ever stop to realize how strong the fifth step is? How important it is? This step is, by the way, is a step of enormous spiritual significance. And we find the references to system-like procedures and ceremonies and rites going all the way back into all ancient writings. The idea not only of confessing our wrongs to God, but more especially to each other. And St. Paul wrote about Ephesians, and we find the book of James as well. Confess your sins one to another. There's something that happens there, and the big book tells us that when we do this, that's when we learn enough of humility, honesty, and fearlessness that is necessary to do the rest of the steps. You can see that this is all very consistent, can't you? Consistent one with another. We're fooling ourselves deep down every man, woman, child with the fundamental idea of God. Next paragraph, we found the great reality deep down within us. And the last analysis only there that he may be found. It was so with us. It's interesting too for you when you think in terms of higher power as being somebody's pickup truck or a gas tree or something. When you read the big book and you notice that these words are capitalized, the he is capitalized. It's not it. Great reality is capitalized. Higher power is capitalized. Why? That's what we do when we are indicated a deity. When you hear people talk about the group being a higher power, take that with a huge grain of salt, if you can even swallow. I promise you, you have never seen anybody get down on their knees and pray to their group. Just ain't gonna happen. If you're talking about higher power, only in the generic sense, that the group has a lot of power, more than I have. That's okay, but that's not what the big book's talking about. And Bill got so far off base with that, it really disturbed me when I think how many times he kowtowed to the pressure from the liberals and talked just offhandedly about the group could be a higher power. Impossible. We're not deities. I have an acquaintance who's been a member for a long time. He's had a few breakdowns and divorces and stuff, but he's all very fond of saying that he couldn't read when he came in. Didn't need the big book, didn't need the steps. He made his pickup his higher power. To my certain knowledge, he's owned 7 pickups since then, and each one has been his higher power. And I asked him one day, what do? How do you transfer the higher power when you transfer title? Is that how you do it? Oh man. You know what disturbed me is irrationality. So much of the stuff we hear around these rooms these days is just totally irrational. Doesn't make any sense. Crazy. But look, it's very simple. Somebody tells you to do something, and you're not sure. You ask them, gee, where's that in the big book? And the next question, where's God in that equation? If it's not in the book and God's not there, I promise you can safely ignore it. Probably not only is it not going to work, but it'll flat out kill you. Page 55. Next to the last paragraph, the penultimate paragraph. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. But you notice that excludes those who are not like it. With this attitude, you cannot fail. That's a great line. I want you to remember that, to use it with your sponsees. When they're showing you that good attitude, you look them right in the eye and tell them, look, with this attitude, you can't fail. That really pops the cork for them, I'm telling you. Now they're going to want us to keep that attitude. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In this book you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. The story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Now then, you can read that story. It's kind of interesting. Page 57. What was this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Here we go now. Pay attention here. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so, as God restored us all to our right minds, to this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. Boy, that's a powerful promise, isn't it? He has come to all who have honestly sought him. And that refers us to the third pertinent idea, doesn't it? That God can and will restore us, take away our obsession, compulsion to drink, if we seek him. So now, as a sponsor, you know what your job is. You're going to teach your people how to seek God. It is in the seeking of God that they are restored to sin. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. No equivocation there either, is there? Remember, this book was written by people who are telling us precisely what happened to them. This book is a history. It's not opinion. It's not philosophy. It's history. Everything in here is telling us exactly what happened to them and how they did it and how they recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind. All right, guys, I'm going to, next week, we'll begin our study of the fifth step, our fifth chapter. I promise you, we're going to be on that chapter for a long time. But we're going to examine every nook and cranny of that thing. Okay, let's close the meeting.